Welcome to Come Follow Me, Canadian Style. We're in the Book of Mormon, Mosiah 18 through 24, week 21. Let's begin. Lots to do today. I'm reintroducing a different style map. This map was generated by Tyler Griffin, and I've given you the article where he posted this. I believe it was back in 2019. This map is generated from information of 300 or more different geographic indicators given in the Book of Mormon. It's not an actual map of a place. It just shows what could have been. Chapter 18. Now it came to pass that Alma, who had fled from the servants of King Noah, repented of his sins and iniquities, and went about privately among the people, and began to teach the words of Abinadi, yea, concerning that which was to come, and also concerning the resurrection of the dead and the redemption of the people, which was to be brought to pass through the power and suffering and death of Christ, and his resurrection and ascension into heaven. And as many as would hear his words he did teach, and he taught them privately, that it might not come to the knowledge of the king. And many did believe on his words. Verse 10. And now I say unto you, if this be the desire of your hearts, what have you against being baptized in the name of the Lord, as a witness before him, that you have entered into a covenant with him, that you will serve him and keep his commandments, and he may pour out his spirit more abundantly upon you. From Elder Ballard. When we covenant in the waters of baptisms to stand as witnesses of God at all times, and in all things and in all places, we're not talking solely about fast and testimony meetings. It may not always be easy, convenient, or politically correct to stand for truth and right, but it is always the right thing to do. Always. Verse 12. Now it came to pass that Alma took Helam, he being one of the first, and went and stood forth in the water and cried, saying, O Lord, pour out thy spirit upon thy servant, that he may do this work with holiness of heart. And after Alma had said these words, both Alma and Helam were buried in the water, and they arose and came forth out of the water rejoicing, being filled with the Spirit. And again Alma took another, and went forth a second time into the water, and baptized him according to the first. Only he did not bury himself again in the water. From Joseph Fielding Smith. We may conclude that Alma held the priesthood before he, with others, became disturbed with King Noah. Whether this is so or not makes no difference, because in the book of Mosiah, it is stated definitely that he had authority. If he had authority to baptize, that is evidence that he had been baptized. Therefore, when Alma baptized himself with Helam, that was not a case of Alma baptizing himself, but merely as a token to the Lord of his humility and full repentance. In fact, symbolic baptisms like this occurred throughout most of the 1800s and wasn't finally discouraged until the 1890s. Verse 16, and after this manner he did baptize every one that went forth to the place of Mormon, and they were in number about 204 souls, yea, and they were baptized in the waters of Mormon, and were filled with the grace of God. And they were called the Church of God, or the Church of Christ, from that time forward. And it came to pass that whosoever was baptized by the power and authority of God was added to his church. I'm again referencing this map by Tyler Griffin, who gives a very detailed outline of the area. I'm doing this so that you can understand that not very far from Nephi and from Shiloh was this area called the Waters of Mormon, where Alma began to baptize so many people. 22, and thus he commanded them to preach, and thus they became the children of God. And he commanded them that they should observe the Sabbath day and keep it holy, and also every day they should give thanks to the Lord their God. And he also commanded them that the priests whom he had ordained should labor with their own hands for their support. From Marquis Peterson. We can readily see the observance of the Sabbath is an indication of the depth of our conversion. Our observance or non-observance of the Sabbath is an unerring measure of our attitude toward the Lord personally and toward his suffering in Gethsemane, his death on the cross, and his resurrection from the dead. It is a sign of whether we are Christians in very deed, or whether our conversion is so shallow that commemoration of his atoning sacrifice means little or nothing to us. Verse 28, and thus they should impart of their substance of their own free will and good desires towards God, and to those priests that stood in need, yea, and to every needy, naked soul. And this he said unto them, having been commanded of God, and they did walk uprightly before God, imparting to one another, both temporally and spiritually, according to their needs and their wants. Verse 33. And now the king said that Alma was stirring up the people to rebellion against him. Therefore he sent his army to destroy them. And it came to pass that Alma and the people of the Lord were appraised of the coming of the king's army. Therefore they took their tents and their families and departed into the wilderness. And they were in number about 450 souls. So that's a ward-sized group of people. I like this picture. Although not technically accurate, you can see that there are soldiers looking and there are people hiding from the soldiers. This appears to be at the waters of Mormon. Back to the seminary map. These people left the land of Nephi and the waters of Mormon and founded a place called Helam. And we'll continue with this story later in Mosiah 23 and 24 in today's lesson. Helam, of course, was the name of the first man that was baptized. So that's interesting. Chapter 19, verse 1. And it came to pass that the army of the king returned, having searched in vain for the people of the Lord. Now behold, the forces of the king were small, having been reduced, and there began to be a division among the remainder of the people. Some people were finally realizing that King Noah was not their friend. And the lesser part began to breathe out threatenings against the king, and there began to be a great contention among them. Now there was a man among them whose name was Gideon. And he, being a strong man and an enemy to the king, therefore he drew his sword and swore in his wrath that he would slay the king. And you know the story. He chases him up to the top of the tower. Verse 7, and now the king cried out in anguish of his soul, saying, Gideon, spare me, for the Lamanites are upon us, and they will destroy us. Yea, they will destroy my people. Now the king was not so much concerned about his people as he was about his own life. Nevertheless, Gideon did spare his life. And the king commanded the people that they should flee before the Lamanites, and he himself did go before them, and they did flee into the wilderness with their women and their children. I think this is the only time that King Noah led from the front. And it came to pass that the Lamanites did pursue them, and did overtake them, and began to slay them. Now it came to pass that the king commanded them that all the men should leave their wives and their children, and flee before the Lamanites. Now there were many that would not leave them, but had rather stay and perish with them. And the rest left their wives and their children and fled. You have to wonder what they were thinking. Perhaps they thought Noah had a plan. You know this story. The people that remained sent out their wives and their beautiful daughters and begged the Lamanites not to kill them. And they had compassion on them and stopped the killing. Meanwhile, the men who had followed the king came to their senses and decided they wanted to go back. The king forbade them, so they killed him by burning him at the stake. But the priests of Noah escaped into the wilderness. Verse 26, and also Limhi, being the son of the king, having the kingdom conferred upon him by the people, made an oath unto the king of the Lamanites, and his people should pay tribute unto them, even 1/2 of all they possessed. And it came to pass that Limhi began to establish the kingdom and to establish peace among his people. And the king of the Lamanites set guards round about the land, that he might keep the people of Limhi in the land, that they might not depart into the wilderness. And he did support his guards out of the tribute which he did receive from the Nephites. Chapter 20. Now there was a place in Shemlon where the daughters of the Lamanites did gather themselves together to sing and to dance and to make themselves merry. And it came to pass that there was one day a small number of them gathered together to sing and dance. This is also a very famous story, where the wicked priests of King Noah, being too embarrassed to return to the land and afraid for their lives, abduct these women. Verse 6, and it came to pass when the Lamanites found that their daughters had been missing, they were angry with the people of Limhi, for they thought it was the people of Limhi. Therefore they sent their armies forth, yea, even the king himself went before his people, and they went up unto the land of Nephi to destroy the people of Limhi. Now Limhi had discovered them from the tower. Even all their preparations for war did he discover. Therefore he gathered his people together and laid wait for them in the fields and in the forests. There's a big battle. The king of the Lamanites is wounded, is left behind. They bind his wounds after winning the battle, and they're going to kill him. But the king, Limhi, says no. Verse 17, and now when Gideon heard these things, the Lamanite king had accused them of stealing the Lamanite daughters. He being the king's captain, he went forth and said unto the king, I pray thee forbear, and do not search this people, and lay not this thing to their charge. For do you not remember the priests of thy father, whom this people sought to destroy? And are they not in the wilderness? And are not they the ones who stole the daughters of the Lamanites? So they convince the kings to go out and plead for mercy, which they do, and reestablish the peace. The Lamanites are placated, and the war stops. Chapter 21. And it came to pass that Limhi and his people returned to the city of Nephi and began to dwell in the land again in peace. Verse 3. The Lamanites began to be agitated again. Now they durst not slay them because of the oath which the king had made unto Limhi, but they would smite them on their cheeks and exercise authority over them, and begin to put heavy burdens on their backs and drive them as they would a dumb donkey. Yea, and all this was done that the word of the Lord might be fulfilled. And now the afflictions of the Nephites were great, and there was no way that they could deliver themselves out of their own hands, for the Lamanites had surrounded them on every side. And it came to pass that the people began to murmur with the king because of their afflictions, and they began to be desirous to go against them to battle. And they did afflict the king sorely with their complaints. Therefore he granted unto them that they should do according to their desires. And then we have a series of battles. Verse 11, came to pass that their continual cries did stir up the remainder of the people of Limhi to anger against the Lamanites, and they went again to battle, but they're driven back and suffer much loss. Yea, and they went again the third time and suffered in the like manner, and those that were not slain returned again to the city of Nephi. Verse 13, and they did humble themselves even to the dust, subjecting themselves to the yoke of bondage, submitting themselves to be smitten and to be driven to and fro and burdened according to the desires of their enemies. And they did humble themselves even to the depths of humility, and they did cry mightily to God. Yea, even all the day long did they cry unto their God that he would deliver them out of their afflictions. Now, Mormon, who is compiling these stories, seems to see our day. And although we may not be in the type of bondage they were in, this whole week is about bondage and how to get out of bondage. Verse 15, now the Lord was slow to hear their cry because of their iniquities. Nevertheless, the Lord did hear their cries and began to soften the hearts of the Lamanites, that they began to ease their burdens. Yea, the Lord did not see fit to deliver them out of bondage. And it came to pass that they began to prosper by degrees in the land, and began to raise grain more abundantly, and flocks and herds, that they did not suffer with hunger. Now there was a great number of women, more than there was of men. Therefore King Limhi commanded that every man should impart to the support of the widows and their children, that they might not perish with hunger. And this they did because of the greatness of the number that had been slain. 23. And the king, having been without the gates of the city with his guard, discovered Ammon and his brethren, and supposing them to be the priests of Noah, therefore he caused that they should be taken and bound and cast into prison. And had they been the priests of Noah, he would have caused that they should be put to death. Now remember, we're kind of pulling the story back to the present day. And when he found that they were not, that they were his brethren, and had come from the land of Zarahemla, he was filled with exceeding great joy. Now King Limhi had sent previous to the coming of Ammon a small number of men to search for the land of Zarahemla, but they could not find it, and they were lost in the wilderness. Remember, they tried to go back to Zarahemla to get rescued, but they missed it and ended up in the land of desolation to the north. Nevertheless, they did find a land which had been peopled, yea, a land which was covered with dry bones, yea, a land which had been peopled and which had been destroyed. And they, having supposed it to be the land of Zarahemla, returned to the land of Nephi, having arrived in the borders of the land not many days before the coming of Ammon. And they brought a record with them, even a record of the people whose bones they had found, and it was engraved on plates of ore. 28. And now Limhi was again filled with joy on learning from the mouth of Ammon that King Mosiah had a gift from God, whereby he could interpret such engravings. Yea, and Ammon also did rejoice. Yet Ammon and his brethren were filled with sorrow, because of many of their brethren had been slain, and also that King Noah and his priest had caused the people to commit so many sins and iniquities against God. And they also mourned for the death of Abinadi, and also for the departure of Alma and the people that went with him, who had formed a church of God through the strength and power of God, and faith on the words which had been spoken by Abinadi. chapter 22, verse 1. Now it came to pass that Ammon and King Limhi began to consult with the people to know how they should deliver themselves out of bondage. Now remember, they could have been out of bondage before, but they had no place to go, and they thought that Zarahemla had been destroyed, so they had lost hope. And even they did cause that all the people should gather themselves together. And this they did, that they might have the voice of the people concerning the matter. And it came to pass that they could find no way to deliver themselves out of bondage, except it were to take their women and children and their flocks and their herds and their tents and depart into the wilderness. For the Lamanites being so numerous, it was impossible for the people of Limhi to contend with them, thinking to deliver themselves out of bondage by the sword. Now it came to pass that Gideon went forth and stood before the king and said unto him, Now, O king, thou hast hitherto hearkened unto my words many times, when we have been contending with our brethren the Lamanites. And he offers them a plan where they get the Lamanites drunk, and then they sneak out during the night. 13. And after many days in the wilderness, they arrived in the land of Zarahemla and joined Mosiah's people and became his subjects. And it came to pass that Mosiah received them with joy, and he also received their records, and also the records which had been found by the people of Limhi. Those are the 24 gold plates from the Jaredites. And it came to pass that when the Lamanites had found that the people of Limhi had departed out of the land by night, they sent an army into the wilderness to pursue them. Chapter 23. Notice here that part of the chapter is in regular print and part is italicized. Anything in regular print, as we've discussed before, was on the gold plates. Anything italicized has been added subsequently. I want you to also notice the date here, 145 to 121 BC. So for a period of 24 years, Alma and the people who escaped originally from King Noah lived in peace, 24 years. Verse 3, they had fled 8 days' journey into the wilderness. I also want you to remember that number, 8 days. And they came to a land, yea, even a very beautiful land, pleasant land, and a land of pure water. And they pitched their tents and began to till the ground and began to build buildings. Yea, they were industrious and did labor exceedingly. And the people were desirous that Alma should be their king, for he was beloved of his people. There's a whole section here that talks about wicked kings and righteous kings and no need for a king. But we're going to deal with that a little bit later in Mosiah, so we'll leave that for now. Verse 19, and it came to pass that they began to prosper exceedingly in the land, and they called the land Helam. Remember the first guy that was baptized? Verse 20, and it came to pass that they did multiply and prosper exceedingly in the land of Helam, and they built a city which they called the city of Helam. Nevertheless, the Lord seeth fit to chasten his people, yea, he trieth their patience and their faith. Nevertheless, whosoever putteth his trust in him, the same shall be lifted up at the last day. Yea, and thus it was with this people. 25. For behold, it came to pass that while they were in the land of Helam, yea, in the city of Helam, while tilling the land round about, behold, an army of the Lamanites was in the borders of the land. And it came to pass that the brethren of Alma fled from their fields and gathered themselves together in the city. They were much frightened because of the appearance of the Lamanites. These were the Lamanites that were looking for Limhi and the people who had escaped. Remember, they were wandering around and they stumbled upon Amulon and then upon Helam. Now, you might wonder why these righteous people all of a sudden had this bad thing happen. But remember back in Mosiah chapter 11, these people prior to being baptized were the ones that rejected Abinadi and took him to King Noah and where he was killed. And the Lord had promised them that they would be in bondage and afflicted by their enemies. Now, it's kind of interesting because you can choose two ways to be in bondage. You can accept it the way the Lord has presented it and get out quickly, as these people do, or you can be like King Limhi and be under bondage for years and years. Verse 30, now the armies of the Lamanites, which had followed after the people of King Limhi, had been lost in the wilderness for many days. Behold, they had found those priests of King Noah in a place which they called Amulon, and they had begun to possess the land of Amulon and had begun to till the ground. Now the name of the leader of those priests was Amulon. And it came to pass that Amulon did plead with the Lamanites, and he also sent forth their wives, who were the daughters of the Lamanites, remember the ones that were abducted, to plead with their brethren that they should not destroy their husbands. We have some Stockholm syndrome happening here. Verse 35, and Amulon and his brethren did join the Lamanites, and they were traveling in the wilderness in the search of the land of Nephi, when they discovered the land of Helam, which was possessed by Alma and his brethren. And it came to pass that the Lamanites promised unto Alma and his brethren that if they would show them the way which led to the land of Nephi, that they would grant unto them their lives and their liberty. But after Alma had shown them the way that led to the land of Nephi, the Lamanites would not keep their promise, but they set guards round about the land of Helam over Alma and his brethren. Chapter 24. And it came to pass that Amulon did gain favor in the eyes of the king of the Lamanites. This Amulon must have been a very intriguing guy. Therefore the king of the Lamanites granted unto him and his brethren that they should be appointed teachers over his people, yea, even over the people who were in the land of Shemlon, in the land of Shilom, and the land of Amulon. Now the name of the king of the Lamanites was Laman, being called after the name of his father, and therefore he was called King Laman, and he was king over a numerous people. You have to wonder if they didn't follow the same thing that the Nephites did when they called each of their kings Nephi. Verse 4, and he appointed teachers of the brethren of Amulon in every land which was possessed by his people. And thus the language of Nephi began to be taught among the people of the Lamanites. I think this means the written language. And they were a people friendly with one another. Nevertheless, they knew not God. Neither did the brethren of Amulon teach them anything concerning the Lord their God, neither the law of Moses, nor did they teach them the words of Abinadi. But they taught them that they should keep their record, that they might write one to another. Verse 8, and now it came to pass that Amulon, he's appointed king over the land of Helam, began to exercise authority over Alma and his brethren, and began to persecute him, and caused that his children should persecute their children. For Amulon knew Alma, that he had been one of the king's priests, and that it was he that had believed the words of Abinadi, and was driven out before the king. Therefore he was wroth with him, for he was subject to the king Laman, yet he exercised authority over them, and put tasks upon them, and put taskmasters over them. And it came to pass that so great were their afflictions that they began to cry mightily to God. And Amulon commanded them that they should stop their cries, and he put guards over them to watch them, that whosoever should be found calling upon God should be put to death. You know, it's interesting here that even though Amulon knew about the Lord and didn't teach the Lamanites, he was afraid of them praying because he knew that there was power in following God. Verse 12, and Alma and his people did not raise their voice to the Lord their God, but did pour out their hearts to him, and he did know the thoughts of their hearts. From Orson F. Whitney, no pain that we suffer, no trial that we experience is wasted. It ministers to our education, to the development of such qualities as patience, faith, fortitude, and humility. All that we suffer and all that we endure, especially when we endure it patiently, builds up our characters, purifies our hearts, expands our souls, and makes us more tender and charitable, more worthy to be called the children of God. It is through sorrow and suffering, toil and tribulation that we gain the education that we come here to acquire, and which will make us more like our Father and Mother in heaven. From Elder Richard G. Scott, the Lord is intent on your personal growth and development. That progress is accelerated when you willingly allow Him to lead you through every growth experience you encounter, whether initially it be to your individual liking or not. When you trust in the Lord, when you're willing to let your heart and your mind be centered in His will, when you ask to be led by the Spirit to do His will, you are assured of the greatest happiness along the way and the most fulfilling attainment from this mortal experience. If you question everything you are asked to do or dig in your heels at every unpleasant challenge, you make it harder for the Lord to bless you. Verse 15, and it came to pass that the burdens which were laid upon Alma and his brethren were made light. Yea, the Lord did strengthen them, that they could bear up their burdens with ease. And they did submit cheerfully and with patience to all the will of the Lord. And it came to pass that so great was their faith and their patience, that the voice of the Lord came unto them again, saying, be of good comfort, for on the morrow I will deliver you out of bondage. 17, and he said unto Alma, thou shalt go before this people, and I will go with thee, and deliver this people out of bondage. And now it came to pass that Alma and his people in the night gathered their flocks together and also of their grain, yea, even all the nighttime were they gathering their flocks together. And in the morning the Lord caused a deep sleep to come upon the Lamanites, yea, and all their taskmasters were in a profound sleep. And Alma and his people departed into the wilderness, and when they had traveled all day, they pitched their tents in a valley, and they called the valley Alma, because he led their way in the wilderness. Now remember, I asked you to recall that they traveled first 8 days, and now this is another day, so 9 days away from the land of Nephi. Verse 21, yea, and in the valley of Alma they poured out their thanks to God, because he had been merciful unto them, and eased their burdens, and to deliver them out of bondage. For they were in bondage, and none could deliver them, except it were the Lord their God. And now the Lord said unto Alma, haste thee, and get thee and this people out of this land, for the Lamanites have awakened, and do pursue thee. Therefore get thee out of this land, and I will stop the Lamanites in this valley, that they come no further in pursuit of this people. And it came to pass that they departed out of the valley, and took their journey into the wilderness. And after they had been in the wilderness 12 days, they arrived in the land of Zarahemla, and King Mosiah did also receive them with joy. So the quick way from the land of Nephi to the land of Zarahemla is 8 plus 1 plus 12, or 21 days. Remember, sometimes they wandered for 40 days trying to find it. But the quick way, if you follow the Lord's way, it was only 21 days. Now, this whole section has been about bondage, all kinds of different bondages. It's almost like Mormon could see our day. Okay, he could see our day. And he knew that we would have bondage, but different kinds of bondage. And no matter what the bondage was or is, the solution is always to come unto Christ. I testify that no matter where we are or what we're doing or what we have done in the past, that the only way out, the only way back is to come unto Christ. And that's what this whole week has been about, being released from bondage. So whatever bondage we're in, we can choose to fight it, or we can choose to follow the Lord. Our choice. We'll continue with this excellent story next week. Have a great week.